Alright. Welcome back to the podcast, guys. I've been liking recording some more about kind of like Adventist culture. Now, mind you, I'm more so from the LA culture, like in Los Angeles. That's so different a lot of times. And because LA in general, Southern California in general, tends to be more not so much with the conservative side of things, but so when we're kind of looking at that, we kind of notice that the Adventists in general tend to be pretty different from like your mainstream Protestant Christians. Now, I'm not going to go into like a whole lot of historical stuff. I'm just going to talk about kind of the general modern experience. I've talked a lot about experiences, but I would say we can talk about rites of passage, because in most cultures you're going to have rites of passage of some kind. Like in Catholicism, a lot of times there's like your first communion, or your baptism when you're really young usually, or like if there's like a baby dedication or a wedding or a baptism or a things like that. So in Adventist culture, usually there's the baptism. And the baptism doesn't usually take place in your very young youth. I've never known of any churches that do that. Usually, the difference between the denominations that do the childhood baptisms and Adventism's traditions is that they believe that the person being baptized should be accountable and understanding of what's considered right and what's considered wrong, to be able to make a choice if they want to actually choose to get baptized. And before they're knowledgeable and able to discern between what's right and wrong, they're not necessarily considered accountable for things that they do. Now, there's always those commandments about like obeying your parents and, just generally keeping the commandments and things. But, a lot of times when you're young, like you're taught a lot about the Bible, a lot about the traditions of what's considered okay and not okay, a lot about that, you're kind of expected to get baptized and make a choice sometime. And usually it's in like your later youth, usually close to like your early teen years is usually kind of preferred, even though it's not like a written spoken thing. And a lot of times, unless you go directly to a pastor and say, hey, I think I'm ready to, get baptized, you don't usually do pretty much anything. Like, unless you're actually like ready to do it, you don't usually I'm trying to think if you do. Yeah, you don't usually do anything. I've never seen someone being like approached, like, do you want to do the baptism? And usually the only thing I've kind of seen like that is when there is a baptism, they ask at the end, at least the church I was in, they would ask at the end, does anyone here in the congregation feel kind of moved to, start working towards the steps to get baptized, at a later date, not at that very moment. And you basically get baptized. If you stand up at the part of the service, then they'll recognize you, as, the pastor would just recognize you and notice that you stood up and said that you were interested, and then they would probably approach you or call you, or you would get in contact with them and start the process. So usually, at least when I was younger, there was a book. I don't remember what the book was, but it was a book about the church and the Bible, and basically what you're buying into, like what you're making the decision to follow. And ultimately, it's about, making a choice to make Jesus Christ your Lord and Savior, meaning that, God saves you from your sins, and that's the general decision you're making. But then in the class, you're also taught a lot about Adventist traditions, how Adventists have certain traditions and read the Bible and study certain things that make you ready, that make you kind of I guess in the viewpoint of the Adventist church, you're considered to be more accurately following the Bible than any other, Protestant churches. Do I believe that? No, but that's kind of what you're taught, is that this is right, and then you're taught all the differences of what the Adventists do, and how come the way they do it is considered right according to the Adventist church, and how other churches traditionally do things wrong. So a lot of things you'll see them focusing on are things like the baptism itself, the process of baptism that, like I mentioned, that is at an older age, usually around 12 years old or so, you're able to actually accept to be baptized, and no one's really going to hassle you over it. People do get baptized at older ages, even like late adulthood, very late, like elderly age, senior citizen adults, middle-aged, people in their 20s. Some people get re-baptized. And then another thing I forgot to mention is that, another way that you can get into being baptized is if they do at the end of the service an altar call. Now, usually the only time in our congregation when we did altar calls, where the pastor did an altar call, would be after communion, and our service didn't have communion every week. They did it once a quarter, and quarters in the Adventist church is every 13 weeks. So you have 4 13-week periods throughout the year, and so the quarterlies go for 13 weeks. I don't know if there's like a mission report or something, I don't remember, But a lot of the quarterly topics go for 13 weeks. You have the same quarterly. When I was younger, they would print it out and you would have it for Sabbath school, but every day during the week there would be like lessons, and you would have like a little study guide book, and then whatever that topic was for the week would be what you would study on the Sabbath at the Sabbath school class before church. And so so we would do every 13 weeks, they would do communion at the end of the service, and then they would ask, they would explain it, like that, if you're a baptized member or a member of the church or an adult, you can take communion. Anybody who's a visitor is welcome to take communion or not. They also do like foot washing, but let's get back to that. But yeah, basically at the end of that whole communion ceremony that's at the end of a regular church service, the pastor would ask, is there anyone who didn't partake or who didn't who either wants to rededicate their lives to God or wants to newly become a Christian. Is there anybody who's interested in that? And usually you're asked to stand up. I don't know why they always put people on the spot, but you're usually asked to stand up. So you would stand, and usually they would notice you, and you'd stand through like an ending prayer. And usually I don't think anything really would happen after that. Like, you could either come up to the front for the altar call or stand up at your seat. And then, I don't know, I feel like that was usually around the time where people were giving their lives to God, but that wasn't necessarily a baptism. That was just like a public declaration that you're accepting God. But it wasn't the baptism ceremony. I don't know if after altar calls, if you really would get approached for somebody to try to start lessons with the pastor, or if you would get a call, or if you could call in. Like, I don't really think that really happened at the altar call, but it was kind of like a step towards, like, and you could do that every single altar call. You could say that you could stand up or go up front every altar call if you really wanted to. And they may have had them more than once every quarter, because that seems like not a lot to me. I feel like they did have more, but it wasn't every week. So yeah, going back to the baptism, you would take these classes and you would learn all this stuff. So you would learn about, usually they talk a lot about the Sabbath, the fourth commandment, and all the commandments, all the 10 commandments pretty much, but the fourth commandment, they talk about, why does the Adventist church do it Friday night to Saturday night, I'll talk about this more in detail. I'm just going to go in general about the topics. You talk about, the Old Testament laws, the dietary restrictions about like eating only animals with a cloven hoof that chew their cud, and certain kind of things like that. So like you can eat beef or ox or that kind of thing. Like, what kind of food is like appropriate to eat? Like, no shellfish, no bottom feeders, no calamari, no mussels, no clams, no pork. Pork is a big one. No pork. So that means no ham, no bacon, no sausage. If you are going to eat meat, it needs to be the right types of meat. So birds, certain types of fish, in certain type of beasts, but you can't really just eat any old animal. And in the Adventist tradition, it's preferred to have a plant-based diet. You're kind of looked a little more highly upon if you're vegetarian or vegan, but you're kind of still in good standing if you eat meat, as long as it's the right meats. If you're running around eating like pork and bacon and pork chops and chashu and shrimp and all this other stuff, it's a little bit of a taboo thing, but people do it. And then there's other stuff about like not being like adorned with a lot of jewelry and having more of like a humble lifestyle, not having like extra expensive flashy clothing, not having, jewelry that makes you stand out, not drinking caffeine, meaning coffee, tea, Coca-Cola, not smoking, not drinking, or doing other drugs, certain lengths of modesty of clothing, like not wearing really short skirts or short shorts or midriffs and all that kind of stuff. What else? And there's a lot of rules, basically. There's the conversation about, how the Adventists believe about Lucifer being the start to evil in heaven, and about a lot of the Ellen G. White books and her role in Adventism, and that about baptism being at a certain old enough age to be able to make the choice yourself, and that it's a lifetime permanent decision, and you can make the choice yourself, and that the baptism is by immersion, meaning that you're not sprinkled or not dipped, but your whole body is fully immersed under the water. And that might be just about it, other than following the 10 Commandments. Going to church, tithing 10%. I think they say 10% before taxes, and then 5% to charity before taxes. So you're not considering the taxes that are taken out, and you're giving the most amount of money. That's already 15%. And in California we get taxed like 20%. So you're missing a lot of money if you're tithing and giving offerings. And it's also kind of not really pushed, but missionary work is talked about. Missionary service for like a year in another country that where there's people of need, like in certain villages and things, or even in the U.S. I know people who did mission work at a Navajo reservation in Arizona. There's an Adventist reservation. There's an Adventist residential school there called Holbrook, and I think it goes grades K through 12. It might be K through 9 or something like that. And they have like a trade kind of program on site and stuff. Like, I've been there before. I've seen it. I was surprised that there were like little kids, like 5-year-olds, dorming there. Like, it's a boarding academy. They board there. They stay there. I was told that a lot of I don't know the percentage, but that it's not uncommon, like that some of the students, their parents use it more like an orphanage to take better care of the kids. And it's very cheap. It's under $100 a kid, but it's still expensive for some people. And then there are people like sponsoring the kids sometimes. And yeah, so there's mission work. You kind of get taught a little bit too about like certain professions, like doctors, nurses, teachers, people in the health and nutrition fields. I was never really taught too much about mental health, but I'm pretty sure they're weaving that in. And yeah, so the Adventist Church really pushes people learning their own, having programs like schools, universities, hospitals. They have a lot of colleges, a lot of elementary schools, a lot of academies, junior academies, boarding academies. I have a lot of friends that went to Adventist boarding schools and graduated from there. I have a lot of friends who went to Adventist colleges or Adventist universities, graduated from there. I had a lot of friends who were theology majors or double majored, with one of their majors being theology. A lot of friends who became pastors, who got a master's in divinity. I have a lot of friends who did mission work in places like Nepal and Tanzania and Chuk and Yap. I think Yap, not Chuk. That's like in the Micronesian islands. Like I mentioned, Holbrook in Arizona. We did a lot of annual mission trips when I was still there, from grades 8 till, I think my generation was the only generation that was there through a lot of like junior college. Like we were one of the first generations in that church to kind of consider community colleges over going in debt and going into an Adventist university. A lot of us went to the local public community college, and that was a bit not okay. And so yeah, they would go to the public schools and into a public university or the public lifestyle, and still would be at church. We were the first group that I remember. There were people in their 20s and 30s still coming to church, which usually in the Adventist church there's a big gap. You usually leave around college age, around 18 or so, and you'd probably be going to church like through the school, but usually the schools are like in kind of more rural areas. Adventism, they tend to value kind of not living in the major cities because of health and stress reasons, polluted air, things like that. And they tend to have like health centers. There's the ABC stores, the Adventist Book Center. There's a truck there that comes around places, I think, and you could buy like snacks and foods and canned goods. And they have Loma Linda has their own brand of veggie meats, canned and frozen veggie meats. They have their own little stores and stuff, and they have a lot of like little nutritional stores, and you'll usually find a lot of vegan and vegetarian and organic foods, food spots and like things like that around Adventist schools, Adventist universities. I think La Sierra University is the closest to like a major city. And so yeah, that's kind of the stuff you kind of learn about. But before you go to even becoming baptized, you're basically already indoctrinated with these things. One form of the tradition, one thing that helps in the tradition with the indoctrination is definitely the Sabbath. If your family keeps the Sabbath the way that Adventists traditionally keep it, then you're technically going to be either involved in church every week, or you're going to be often studying the Bible or listening to sermons or doing things related to the Bible at least once a week. So you're usually going to be, like I was raised around people who, we would listen as kids. The mom would come in and they would have like these cassette tapes to put us to sleep, and we would listen to like Bible stories that were like kind of paraphrased for kids and kind of like sound effects in the background. And there was one about like Daniel and the Lion's Den. This was like before VeggieTales, so it was like it was just like biblical stories that we would listen to, and it was like major stories in the Bible that we would listen to. And we'd do sleepovers with this friend all the time, and the mom would put on those tapes, and that would be what we'd listen to on the Sabbath. Or we could listen to sermons, or and this is like, I don't know, I was probably like 6 years old, 7 years old, going to sleep to the Bible. It's like that kind of stuff sticks in your head when you're a little kid. It's like, if you do that even once a week, it's almost like when you play sports once a week, you're going to get good after years of that. You kind of learn it very easily. It kind of sticks with you. And so, that's one way of the indoctrination, of learning all this stuff, so that by the time you are near 12 or so, or 13 or whatever, you're able to kind of already know a lot. Like if you were raised in the church and your parents were already traditional, or you went to a school, at least like an elementary or high school, every day, like you'd have Bible classes. They would teach you about this kind of stuff in the classes. You'd have a Bible class like every morning, and then usually you'd have chapel once a week. So even if your family wasn't involved, if you went to the Adventist schools, you were involved. And so the schools like where I went, they didn't serve meat. One thing I noticed, when like later on, when I was working at the school, you could work on the Sabbath. I remember telling them I can't work on the Sabbath. I wasn't like okay with it at that time in my life. This was like in 2003 or so. I was kind of not really into working on the Sabbath. So in the winter, when sundown was around like 4 something, and I was getting off at like this was only Fridays though, but when I was getting off work at like, I'd be getting off work at like 4 instead of like 5 or 6. I'd get off work at like whatever sunset time was for that day. I would clock out, and I wouldn't get paid, but I would tell them, I don't work on the Sabbath, and they were okay with it. But they never told me come in early or anything like that, like compensate and come in like 30 minutes early if you're leaving 30 minutes early. They never said anything. So there was, I think that's generally how it looked. That was the main rite of passage, was the baptism. And then once you were baptized, our church gave us like little small gifts. So I think I got this copy of Steps to Christ. It was a really nice version. It was, this was from my youth pastor. He gave me an Ellen G. White Steps to Christ and an Ellen G. White Desire of Ages. The Steps to Christ was hardback. The paperback was the Desire of Ages. And then I got from the pastor in the church, I think they gave us a blank like picture frame where you could put a picture, possibly like a picture from your baptism day, and a CD. I got this CD by Sonic Flood. I can't remember which CD it was, but I remember it was like green and blue. I think it had like green, blue, and white swirls on the front cover. And I think I still have the CD. I don't think I ever threw it away. But I got baptized like real, like me and a bunch of my friends. I want to say we were like 12, 13, 11, 12, 13 years old. Like a lot of us, I think there were like 12 of us or 16 of us or something. There was like a big group of us. They were all like church youth, that were really close, and we had a really good youth pastor. And I think we all got baptized around the same time. And there wasn't like pressure to do it. I didn't feel pressure. I actually felt like it was right for me. My parents never pressured about it or really talked about it or anything. Now, they talked about it afterwards, and I remember my dad making comments, because I'm from LA, and it's a big movie culture out here, and that was one thing we kind of were allowed to do, even though technically our church kind of like didn't really prefer us to be going out to movies, but it also wasn't drinking and all that kind of stuff. And it's like we were, like I mentioned, we were a group that you usually didn't see youth and college age and high schoolers so involved in church until our generation. We were pretty close to the church. We were all involved in like Adventist schools 5 days a week. We went to sports league on Sundays. We went to church on Saturdays. We were very involved. And so, we went to church and stuff, but like we didn't like really have too many other social circles. Like we might have like in our neighborhoods and stuff, but we didn't really have a lot of social circles like in our school, like the public school kids or something like that. Like we didn't usually have all of that. And so we had our social circles that were a small social circle of a lot of us. It was like a whole group of us. And the majority of us, we all lived relatively in the same neighborhood, enough to be able to take a bus or have our parents chaperone us around and like to and from the malls. We basically just go to the mall or the beach all the time. And, at the mall, there were movie theaters, and we could take the buses between the malls or the buses to and from the malls and stuff like that. And we would go to the movies like a lot, and the food court at the mall, and like eat, and like we had independence able to do that. Now, I had other friends whose parents were more strict and didn't even allow them to come with us to the movie theaters or to the malls or to the food court at the malls, and things like that. And so we were kind of like right around, like, not too strict. Like we were still allowed to like go out and do stuff independently, but we were getting chaperoned and stuff too. Like, my mom would come pick us up and everything. She had like a minivan, and she'd kind of shuttle us all over town, and they knew where we were and what we were doing. So it's kind of like, even though we were alone the time between, we weren't like completely left alone. And, we weren't really into like drugs and all that kind of stuff. Like people I knew started getting into that later, but when we were like younger, we didn't really, like through 10th grade, I don't think people really were too much into it, other than a little weed and stuff like that. But most of us who were pretty connected into churches weren't too, we did things like the movie theaters. And then I remember we had satellite in our house, and a lot of times between church and the Sabbath, I was allowed to have people over. Some of my friends, they weren't allowed to do anything on the Sabbath. Other ones were. And so the ones who were allowed could come over, and we would just hang around the house and watch movies or whatever. And we didn't usually go to the movie theater or out to dinner or out to boba or anything like that until actual night. But we would usually hang around the house or go to the park or walk down to the beach and stuff like that, and like, do other kind of like milder just social activities, hanging around in each other's bedrooms, playing chess, And, my parents were home. Like, we were always, like, our parents were always home when we were hanging out. And, like, it was a very chaperoned youth, chaperoned teenage years, too, for the most part. Now, I could go out independently with my friends, but we were pretty chaperoned as far as, like, rides and stuff like that. And so, we were used to kind of socializing Friday nights, Saturday nights, Sundays. There was a lot of stuff to do, and that's mostly what made me enjoy the church a lot, was that there was a lot of activity, there was a lot of social, kind of fun, socially stuff to do. It wasn't just, wake up, go to church, it's Sunday morning, like, go to church, and then that's it. Like, it was like a whole lifestyle, that we were kind of, like, involved with for, like, years. And so, but yeah, as far as rites of passage, that's all we really had. And then, like, the more you were in the church and involved in the church, if they saw that you were kind of, like, involved pretty regularly, or maybe had a skill or a gift or even a willingness to volunteer, even if you weren't good at something, they would let you just kind of do it, or take charge of it and lead it, or have a ministry of your own and stuff like that. So you could either be a part of a ministry or in charge of a ministry. And some of the ministries were like a bigger deal, like being a deacon was an actual position and things like that. But, you could do like, what else was there? You could do like praise team. You could do, which is like, the singing. You could do, like weekly prayer meetings or prayer teams and stuff like that. I know there was a group of ladies that would get together and like knit or crochet, and they would volunteer their time. I think they were called the Busy Bees, and they would knit and crochet and stuff. And then they would give away either blankets or beanies or whatever the projects were. I think they give them to like the homeless or give them to like certain places. And it was pretty good. I mean, like, I had friends that were like pastors' kids, youth pastors' kids. Like, there were people that I was around that were, pretty strict. Like the kind of strict where you don't cook on the Sabbath, you don't clean on the Sabbath. They would cook their meals like tonight when I'm recording this. It's like 7:24 p.m. Everything would be cooked, before Friday night, and then your food would already be pre-cooked for Saturday. And, a lot of my friends couldn't watch sports, they couldn't play sports, they couldn't spend money on anything, they couldn't make money. And I'll get more into those things, but, yeah, it was interesting. But that's, as far as most cultures, most cultures have a rite of passage. I think the baptism is the only real rite of passage that you have in the church. And it's kind of ideal when you're at a younger age, but definitely there are a lot of people who got baptized way later, and that was fine too. So, I don't really think, I don't know, there's kind of like an expectation that's almost like unspoken. Like, you get baptized around 12, 13, then you go to, Adventist college, and, you might take a year between high school and college to go do a year of mission work out of the country. And like, there's unspoken stuff like that. There's like a track that you would be on, that's like the most ideal track to get you to basically your career in a place where you're marrying another Adventist person, raising an Adventist family. That's kind of the goal. And keeping all the traditions and the commandments in the Bible and stuff like that. I feel like most churches aren't that involved. Like, most Protestant churches, you kind of just do your thing, I don't know if there's like a community feel, but it's kind of interesting. I've mentioned this before that, I was raised in a major city. Los Angeles is a huge city, and I was raised in one of the biggest cities in the world, and, still feeling like I had a small town upbringing, considering that I was raised in like an Adventist community for the most part, even though all around me it wasn't Adventist. People never even heard of Seventh-day Adventist. Like, it wasn't even like on people's radar. Like, people didn't know what it was. And usually you just say I'm Adventist and people don't even know what that is. And so, but yeah, I don't know. It kind of depends on your experiences and kind of what you want to do in life. If it's worth it, if it's, okay, if it's helpful, or if it's toxic and, harmful and traumatic. Like, there's ranges. They're from like really good to like really bad, and so I can't really paint a picture for every single person. Everyone's experience is going to be bad or good, or somewhere in the middle. I would say overall my experiences were good, but I did notice what was bad because I was so involved. I did notice things that just didn't vibe well with me. Specifically, it would be the gossip and the, judgment. Those two things were just kind of like not something that I ever was okay vibing with, and just that you couldn't really trust people. There's a lot of backstabbing, a lot of people with anger issues and just taking out their frustrations on people, and a lot of people just not really knowing how to play nicely, and that kind of thing. But I'm gonna keep recording about like Adventist culture just because it's kind of interesting. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about rites of passage and just kind of the process of how you would actually get to a place where you'd be considered like of some kind of a status, versus like, oh, you're just a kid running around. Like, that kind of levels you up. The baptism kind of levels you up to be able to get positions in the church. But then again, they do use their perception of you to choose if you're allowed to actually do stuff. But yeah, we'll get back to that. I mean, I've recorded about a lot of this, but I'm trying to do like an organized version. That's it for this one, and thanks for listening.